Hey everyone, we're happy you could join us for today's session, Test What Matters, Automated Analytics Testing with automation expert Marcus Merrell. I am absolutely thrilled to have Marcus as a guest speaker, and in order to introduce him, here are 5 quick facts about him. Marcus has written UI and API test frameworks since 2001. He is staff quality engineer with RetailMeNot's platform teams and works with other QA developers to evangelize industry best practices to the rest of the company. Marcus is a member in the Selenium conference organizing committee. He is an accomplished musician and totally rocks at karaoke. I know, I heard him. And last but not least, he lives in Austin, Texas with his wife and 2 amazing kids. So I think it's best to let him speak now. Marcus, the stage is yours.
All right, thank you, Adi. I promise to make lots and lots of broad sweeping generalizations based on my own experience, and hopefully you'll find it all to be fairly interesting. Now, after that introduction, I probably should just blaze past the slide where I introduce myself because I think you covered it more than adequately. Thank you very much to Applitools for hosting this event, and I hope everyone is able to get a lot out of it. So let's begin. Today we're going to be talking about what analytics are. We'll go to dive into some real world examples, and then we'll talk about A/B testing and how that feeds into analytics. But most importantly, what I'm hoping you take away from this is why does it matter to you as a QA tester or a developer or manager? And then we'll give some examples, and I'll tell you some broad strokes on how to get started with the automated part of the analytics testing. All right. So I was a game designer in the 90s. That's the thing that I probably didn't tell Adi. Kind of proud of that. But I launched from game design into QA, found a really interesting career since I was in there. I've been in the business since around 2001, and I've been using Selenium WebDriver since Simon Stewart and Jason Huggins' Steel Cage Knife Fight, which I encourage everyone to Google. They are both very, very proud that they are the #1 YouTube hit when you Google Steel Cage Knife Fight. That is the talk where they gave, where they originally tried to talk about combining the Selenium and WebDriver applications around 2007. I've been using WebDriver since almost the day that happened. I've been at RetailMeNot for 6 years. I am, as Adi mentioned, the co-chair of the Selenium Conference Organizing Committee with my friend and colleague, Ashley Huntsberger. I want to do a shameless plug to go to seleniumconf.com, come see us in Bangalore, June 28th to 30th, and then come to see us in Chicago, October 17th to the 19th. The call for papers for Chicago is still open, and we do pay for speaker travel and accommodation if you're able to get something accepted. So I encourage everyone to apply. Now, who is this talk for? Who am I aiming at here? Obviously testers, but also developers. If you haven't dug yet into the world of analytics, this talk will sort of show you how widespread it is and how important it's going to be, maybe for not this job, but maybe for your next job, or maybe future in your current job. Why is it important? How can we get the QA department involved in testing? How do you make your tests visible and relevant to the organization? And then if you're a manager, when should you get QA involved in analytics? I mean, spoiler alert, you should do it now. But how can you justify the time investment? Hopefully I'll be able to cover that as well. And then how do we make sure that we're testing the correct things? Now, why is this important? I dug up a quote based on a KPMG survey that was done of several hundred CEOs. And what they found was that the CEOs don't fully trust the data and analytics on which they're basing these major decisions they're making. And I'm going to go over a specific example of one time that happened at RetailMeNot. CEOs are increasingly recognizing the value and importance of trusted analytics. I probably should have underlined the word trusted there because I think that's part of the whole value add that I'm going to pitch to you today about why you should add QA analytics to your testing vocabulary. This is done by Dr. Thomas Irwin of KPMG. And there's a link to the paper he wrote about it, if you'd like to see. I'll give you a second to pretend you're writing that down. Anyway, it's on slide 5 if you need to remember. We'll talk more about CEOs a little bit later. So user analytics apply to all platforms. It is something that happens. They are events that are cast off along with the usual clicks and events that are done by users. And they're happening on all platforms. We have desktop, with mobile, web. We have native applications like Android and iOS. We also have iPad. These can throw off different kinds of analytics based on screen resolution, based on format. Also, if you think video game consoles like PlayStation and Nintendo Switch, they're also absolutely throwing off analytics as we go through and work through these applications. What they do is they tell the story of how the users are behaving and interacting with your product. And I'll show an example of it here in just a minute. But basically, that's what it looks like. It may look like a lot of hieroglyphics, but in truth, embedded in there are deep user behavior patterns. And if you combine the hundreds of thousands, and in Retail Me Not's case, millions of analytic events we get every day, whether or not you're a registered user, we're not necessarily trying to tie together the details of who you are as a user, but we are trying to tie together information about demographics and collation of data around user behaviors and patterns and things that people are trending right now. And we're able to take this data and tell stories about how things are, how things were, and maybe to be able to predict how things will be in the future. In a minute, I'll actually show a real live example, if the demo gods are with me, of how the Retail Me Not analytics actually look. It's not proprietary, it's public, everyone can see it. And this is true with everyone, including Facebook, where you can see most of the analytics that are being thrown off by the applications that you're using. I do want to talk about B2B versus B2C, and I'll define those first. Because if you're working in one space or the other, you probably have a vague notion of what yours is like, what the other is like. But I think there are some key differences to what you're looking for in analytics working with either. So B2C, what that means is business to consumer. Retail Me Not is one example. Google is another example. You are a business and you primarily service your consumers, which means that companies like this, your primary user is one of millions, and they may be, in a sense, nameless, faceless. You don't absolutely have all of their information, but you are able to observe behaviors, and you do it in large-scale attempts to sort of figure out where the market is headed and figure out exactly how you can get small amounts of lift on different kinds of interactions with your site. Now, if you're B2B, your objective is a little bit different. Business to business are companies like these, Oracle, Microsoft. Businesses selling to other businesses, where in general, you can make the statement that your user base is a little bit smaller. So if you're Microsoft, you're selling to a business and the business has thousands of people in it. Well, that's very different from millions. So what are you able to do with your analytics in a business to business context that you're not able to do with business to consumer? It's a pretty complicated question, but I thought I would mention that these are very different equations, and we're going to go into a little bit of detail. But mostly, when you're business to business, you're dealing with things like, how do I set prices for the software I need to use? As users, when I use IntelliJ, it comes with a pop-up that says, do you mind if we send data back to JetBrains? When you use Microsoft Visual Studio, it does the same thing. Do you mind if we send data back to Microsoft about how you're using the software? And the way you're using the software allows them to do things like figure out how often you use it, what kinds of clicks you make, what kinds of interactions you do and do not take with their software. It allows them, if they're selling airplane parts, for example, to be able to manage inventory for their supply chain without having to put out surveys or take physical inventory. It allows them to anticipate shifts in how their customers are using their product. It allows you to market to new segments of customers you hadn't really thought of before, if you're able to watch and keep an eye on your competitors' analytics. And you can zero in on inefficiencies within your, well, like I said, supply chain or your distribution chain. You can combine this with machine learning, basically, to try to conquer the world, which is how the recent unpleasantness of some headlines have shown up. And I think in a moment we'll talk about the big Facebook. In your B2C world, it's a little bit different conversation. What you're trying to do is take people who hit your site and turn them into customers. And the way you do that is by studying anonymous users, which are hits, someone who goes to your site, just lands on your site. They may or may not do anything on your site, but you're able to sort of track, someone came here, they're from Colorado, they did this thing, and then they left. I've noticed a lot of people just in the last 48 hours have come from Colorado and then they've left our site. I wonder why. We're attracting people from Colorado, but we're then sending them away. They're not enticed to stay. So you might make a decision based on whether or not it would be good to keep someone from Colorado on your site. If you can entice the people from Colorado, I have no idea why I'm picking on Colorado. If you can entice them to stay, they can have what's called a session, which means sort of a series of clicks. So in the case of Retail Me Not, once again, I'll show this site in just a moment. You might be showcasing an offer that's specifically for ski wear, winter wear, something like that. And if you're able to get people to actually go shopping on your site and turn them into session users, then you can get patterns of behavior that you can start to observe. Now, the last thing you want, the holy grail for this, is that you want people to become users, which generally means they give you a tiny piece of their information, mostly email address or something like that, so that they can put a name with a pattern of behaviors, and then they can start to track what you want. Now, we'll talk a little bit about being creepy in the future, and that's not what this talk is about. I do think it's worth addressing, but the main goal with analytics is not to gather information on you so that we can do things that are bad. The goal is to show you things we think you want to see. So in its most pure motivation, it's a noble aspiration, I believe. It can be abused. Once again, not the subject of this talk, but it's definitely something that I want you to be questioning as you enter this conversation with your company, is how are we doing this? Are we doing it ethically? That kind of thing. And the thing to always remember, especially considering the current headlines, is that if you're not paying for the product you're using, then you are the product that is being sold to someone else. And we've seen a crystal clear example of that. But I think it is something that you ought to be aware of, because there's a good chance that your company is already doing this, and you need to make the decision, do I want to be involved in that or not? And the answer is probably yes, because I believe that by exposing more and being more transparent, we can all do good in the world. So let's take some real world examples. All of these companies are doing stuff with analytics. These are all mostly B2C. I think they're all B2C. They're gathering data. They are trying to figure out what is going to create small amounts of lift in their product lifecycle. How can they get, instead of one offer getting 2% of users, how can they make that 2.25% of users? And they do that by comparing different ways of the different ways users go through their path. So shipping and tax calculations, telling you what things they think you might like. So, you know, we know that if you're buying Houses of the Holy, you probably want to see Led Zeppelin 4 also. We do that based on correlation. This is the sort of the earliest, simplest, and most easy to understand examples of analytics that are going across. Now, A/B testing is a method that is used by a lot of companies to determine whether or not they want to make a change in their software. I'm not going to dive too deep into this, but it's pretty widely spread. When I first started doing this talk 3 years ago, almost no one had heard of analytics or A/B testing. And as I've gone along, people have started to hear about it more. So I think the word is getting out, and hopefully this webinar is helping. But this is something that I think testers generally are not as involved with as they should be. But it is a growing conversation, and everyone needs to start asking questions about how are we shipping software to our customers. Retail Me Not is used by millions of people. And I'll show an example later of when things went wrong because we were not doing A/B testing. So I think it's good to explain what it is exactly, which is you take your software, your base software that you're running right now. I will actually go to Retail Me Not at the moment. And I'll show you what our page looks like. This is the main Retail Me Not Macy's.com store page. There are offers all over the page. This page has changed a lot over the last 6 years. It used to have a little cute thatched background in the back. We figured out that that caused slow page loading and did not decrease users' satisfaction. We have a left rail here that allows you to see some of the things we're really trying to put in front of you, like $40 cash back, or the different kinds of offers that we can offer you that will filter based on the kinds of stuff that we have. This is, once again, changed a lot in the past. Each time we introduce a change, what we will do is we'll compose the change we want, and usually it will be something small, like a font color change. I believe these used to be the up to $40 back. I'm not sure that was always orange. Let's just pretend it was blue at one point. Well, one day somebody said, people click on orange better. They can see it better. It's harder to read the blue for some reason on these certain kinds of screens or in certain kinds of browsers. Let's try making it orange and see what happens. So what they do is they code up the orange version of it, and then they start sending that to a random slice of 10% of traffic coming into Retail Me Not. So 10% of the people see that it's orange, and then the other 90% still see the good old-fashioned blue. Now, the first thing this allows us to do is test to make sure that everything still works. Excuse me. The second thing this allows us to do is say, does orange cause more people to click? Or does it cause fewer people to click? The A version of A/B testing is the 90% of traffic. The B version is the trial version that you're putting up for consideration. That's the orange text. And after we run the test for 2 weeks, we'll do a comparison of the data per capita to find out what kind of clicks we got on the orange text. And if we got a significant lift on the orange text, we will promote that version, the B version, to become the default version, so that in the future you'll always see orange. And then when we decide later to change the font color, we'll introduce that in a B segment or something like that. So, I don't know why LastPass is giving me trouble. So, here we are back. It allows us not to change everything at once. It allows us to put feature complete software in production before we've had a chance, before we've risked tanking our traffic for the day because of putting untested software out there. It allows us to slice in small amounts of traffic. And the thing that happens frequently, not at Retail Me Not anymore because we have a much more rigorous process around this, but in the past, sometimes we would forget to change the analytics around the B test when we would put it through. Wouldn't matter so much in the case of orange, but it would matter a lot in the case of something else, like offer ranking mechanism. Offer ranking is the bread and butter of how Retail Me Not makes its money, so we need to protect that with our lives. We would just release these tests after basic QA before we did A/B testing, which led us to the Highball Incident, which is a story I like to tell about the first major incident I was involved with when I got here. So the Highball is a wonderful club in Austin, Texas, where they do karaoke, and they used to do bowling. They don't do that anymore, but there's a great full bar. They do mixology. It's a wonderful place. Well, I believe it was September 5th, 2012. We were going to have a company outing to celebrate some success, and we were going to have a karaoke party, and I was going to win. And it's going to be a great day. And then we realized sometime throughout the day that something went wrong. We were playing around with offer rankings and what order these things fall on our page. We showed that we were trying to play around with whether or not unpopular coupons would have a chance at succeeding if they were moved higher up on the page, because even though they're unpopular and might be expiring very soon, it turns out we make a fair amount of money on them. But what we found after this change was merged was that suddenly the click data that we got on our dashboards was going all over the map. People were clicking less and less and less on certain things, way more on certain things, and we couldn't figure out why in the world this was happening. And it quickly became evident that we were going to have to cancel the party, and I wasn't going to win my karaoke contest. So that made me sad. But what really made me sad was figuring out the root cause here, which was that we have an analytic that we throw off. It's called B21. It's a key value pair, and I will show you what this looks like in real time here in just a minute. And it was showing me the offer ranking. This is how we figure out the offers that are on RetailMeNot are ranked dynamically according to an algorithm. It's not the same for everyone. My offer ranking will be different based on my history and my personal clicks. It'll be different from what Adi sees when she goes to RetailMeNot. And so what we do is when you click on a coupon, we send the real-time ranking of the coupon that you clicked on. We say they clicked on up to 30% off select men's fleece and sleepwear. And when they clicked it, it was ranked number 17. And so as you might expect, the next one, men's khaki starting at $59.95, that's the rank is 18. Well, what we figured out was the next one reset after this section break that says unpopular coupons. B21 got reset to 0, but shouldn't that have said 19? What we figured out was that the section break was causing a reset in the analytics, and that as a result of that, unpopular coupons were being thrown to the top of the page because people said, hey, we found a case where this coupon was ranked number 0 and we sent it off. So re-rank that up to the top of the page because it was obviously a super popular offer. And this happened because analytics had not historically been included in any part of the test design. No A/B testing was done at that point. Data loss was permanent. We could not get that back. And we lost $120,000 in 6 hours. And I didn't get to go to my contest. Now, how could this happen? The VP of engineering comes and he says, how did you let that slip past you during testing? And the answer was, the offers showed up in the exact order we thought they would show up in. I don't understand. And he says, did you compare the actual rankings with the analytics? And what's an analytic? So this is the kind of thing that I'm afraid is happening in a lot of places based on conversations I've had with people. I think I'm right. And so the idea is if you get involved in this, then suddenly you can start to be a little bit more of a hero. So let me show you real quick, just because we're here. I want to show exactly what this looks like. Now, there is a good chance that if you go to your website or your favorite place, if you go to Google, you will see things like I'm about to show you. So if you go into Chrome Developer Tools, hopefully anyone who's in QA is familiar with this stuff. If you're not, this can become your best friend. Click the Network tab at the top. Now, since I know what my analytics look like, I'm going to set a filter here, WSM. That's the name of what ours looks like. Now I'm going to click on a coupon. Now what happened is it pulled up 4 instances, actually a bunch more. So these are analytic events that get thrown off by the server. It is simply an extra HTTP request that goes out as you're clicking. So as with any modern website, when I click on something, it probably sends 120 different HTTP requests. These are the ones that we care about. And if you look at it closely, you can see all sorts of stuff that we're gathering. This is not based on the fact that it's Marcus Merrell. This is based on just different things I'm doing. I mean, my name is trapped in there, but it's not proprietary to what I do. It's showing you information about where I clicked on the offer, the landing, where I'm referred to, the different gift cards. It's telling you all sorts of data about what I just did. Now, if you take that universe of things and you combine it all, then you get the behavior patterns that I have exhibited and the preferences that I have shown on this site. And if you go to a bunch of other websites, I would encourage you to look at that for just anyone, because like I said, it's not proprietary information, it is public. This stuff can tend to be encoded so that it's illegible. We've not found that necessary simply because that takes up more bits and bytes, and performance is how we survive. So I would just encourage you to have a look. Next time you're curious about Amazon and what all information they're gathering, you can find it by using Chrome developer tools. So how this stuff gets developed in my experience, this is where I make broad sweeping generalizations that are not always true. However, it is based on experience and conversations with hundreds or thousands of people all over the industry. But marketing wants to implement a new feature. Somebody wants to, in our case, marketing, for example. Business intelligence says, in order to be able to know whether or not that feature is effective, we need to figure out what kinds of behaviors we need to study. So they'll say, we need to know where in the offer they clicked, how far down the page it was clicked. We need to know, did they scroll all the way down and then back up again? We need to know all sorts of behaviors. And then we need to know, like, was it their first time on the site? How many times had they been on the site? That kind of thing. We would want to start building a profile of this person. And then the product manager says, great, I got it. I will turn that into actionable key value pairs that we want to see every time someone performs a particular action or event. They go to engineering. Engineering will generally, at least in my experience, they will work this into a ticket that's already there. It won't be a separate ticket. It'll say, as you're developing this feature, make sure that you alter the analytics event to add these key value pairs with this data. And then it goes to QA if it actually goes to QA. Now, the thing also in my experience is that the younger junior engineers on the team are the ones who get tasked with the analytics because it's not super fun to code. And the youngest QA people, if they're involved at all, will also be involved because it is some of the most tedious, heartbreaking, eye-crossing stuff you could ever test if you're doing it manually. I'm surrounded by people who agree with me in this room, at least. So the reason you should care about this is because this stuff can be wrong. It can be wrong, and it can be wrong a lot. And if it's wrong, it's $1 million decisions are being based off of what kinds of data this is throwing off. Analytics is software. You should test it like software. It is also everywhere. It is only growing. And companies are becoming pretty smart about how they implement this stuff pretty well. The thing that I have observed, once again, broad sweeping generalization, is that QA is being left behind in this conversation. At Retail Me Not, we do a pretty good job, but it only came about through pain and suffering. Here's the global analytics market opportunity. I mean, imagine what the slide looks like now. That was just real time at the time. This is taking over the world. It's already taken over the world, and I think everyone should know it. And this is where I think that's where we get involved. There's a whole team of people working on this, and it gets worked into these features as they are developed. It's rarely called out separately. And if it is, in my experience, it is called out separately and then deprioritized until the last minute when someone says, hey, you can't ship without that. And so they code it in, throw it in, and it sort of goes without testing. And then generally the QA it does receive are from the business intelligence people whose whole job is to look at this stuff. But the problem is the business intelligence people are pretty far downstream in general. So they're not exactly seeing the forefront. They're not seeing when the event is thrown off. They're only seeing that they're not receiving it properly, which is way too late in the process. But the good news is it's actually not that hard to add to your automated testing. I think it's really appropriate that I'm doing this for Applitools, given that Applitools seems to be pretty easy to drop into your existing Selenium testing. And my hope is that maybe as a result of this webinar, I can pair up with some people and we can produce something that is just as easy to drop in with an extra line of code, or add some stuff to the WebDriver event listener that would make it easy to test your analytics kind of at the same time you're doing the rest of your Selenium testing. The idea, though, is I don't know if you know what a proxy is. I think I should explain that for just a moment. A proxy can sit in between your browser and the web server, and it can intercept the requests that are being sent to your server and intercept the responses that are being sent back and allow you to examine them. Now, it'll catch these, intercept them, and then it will just send them onto the web server unchanged. And then when it receives them, it'll send them back to you unchanged, but it allows you the opportunity to stop and examine and say, hey, I want to know what was in there, and I want to break it apart, and I want to see how this thing actually worked. And it's generally, the analytics themselves are simply an extra HTTP request, and they have a signature that you can identify pretty easily. You intercept that particular request, you filter out everything that you don't care about, and then you look at the key value pairs inside that request, and you compare them with what you expect. So the first thing you need to do is figure out what you expect. In the case of that page that I showed you, I would simply know that the Selenium test framework that I use would tell me that I'm about to click on the 19th offer on the page. And so I would code up a key value pair that says, I expect B21 to say number 19. Since I'm clicking on the title of this offer, I expect this other attribute to say offer title. So I'll give it the WSME, whatever it was called. We'll say offer title. And so you are able, from Selenium, to gather all the information you need to predict what your key value pairs should look like. And then you send that to the expected results. And then once you actually intercept the request that's gone through, you're able to do matchmaking. Sequence is 12. And you compare the expected map you built using Selenium data to the actual result that you got from using the proxy. And you're able to say, yeah, these things match. But hey, I clicked on a code coupon, but it said it was a sale coupon. Now something is wrong, and it will throw an error message. So the cycle is you launch your browser, you navigate to a position, then you signal the proxy to start recording, and then you perform your action, then you stop the proxy, you clean up the test, and then you examine what you're trying to examine with expected versus actual results. My advice would be get as small an action as possible in order to know that your analytic event should have fired, meaning like a single click. You don't want to start the proxy recording, then run an entire Selenium test, and then stop it, and then examine your traffic. You want to just start it, do the click, stop it, and then examine your results. Now, in order to do this, I need to talk about BrowserMob a little bit, but I promise I will show a little bit of code. Now, BrowserMob is a proxy that was created by Patrick Lightbody, very influential person in the Selenium community as well. It's a very lightweight proxy. It allows you to run an external server. So what we would do is we would run a BrowserMob proxy from a Docker image in Amazon Web Services, and we would host that at a place that was really easy to find from DNS, like we would call it like proxy.rmn.something. And then we would use the very simple BrowserMob proxy API to say, I would like a proxy, and I would like for you to give me a proxy and tell me what port it's on. And it will be able to create thousands of proxies at once for your Selenium grid to look into, so that you can examine the proxies from different tests that you're running, and each of them is isolated. They don't bleed over into each other, and you're guaranteed that your proxy is dedicated to you. Now, BrowserMob is pretty rock solid. If my memory is correct, we just recently shut down our AWS servers for some maintenance, and it had been running continuously for about 4 years without being restarted. So it's been pretty great software. There are other proxy products out there, but this is the one that RetailMeNot has found the most success with. So let's talk about some code. I'm going to skip over the fact that this test is disabled because it's currently a little bit out of date, but the fact is we are first going to grab an offer. Now, it could be a whole other talk that we get into how our automation library is built, but we use the page object model to its fullest advantage by saying homepage.getOfferList. That means that when you go to the RetailMeNot.offer list, it will give you a list of offers, and those offers that it gives you are strong typed entities that actually have behaviors on them like get code and stuff like that. So we have, in our Java model, we have modeled the entire RetailMeNot object ecosystem. And so we can say get offer list, I want to search for code offers, and I want a random one. And then you say set proxy to listen har. Now, I have produced a GitHub gist that exposes this method that I would like to share. I think it's on the next slide, the link to it. But you say set proxy to listen har. Har, H-A-R, means HTTP archive. And it's a file format that allows you to look at HTTP request and response cycles. So you set the proxy to listen, and then you say click code button, and then you have another method called wait for har entry to exist, and you tell this har proxy, you tell it what you are looking for. So it will look for WSM.gif that we were looking at earlier, and it will look for these particular key values. And once it sees that, it will unblock this call and go to the next line of code, which is verify HTTP status code. That is just saying to, sorry, my highlights are out of whack. The verify HTTP status code is just basically making sure that the request was okay and that there's not an error at this point. The main thing we do next is examine the entry itself. Now, this is the WSM.gif we're guaranteed because of the filtering we did when we were requesting it. And we break it apart into key value parameters. We build a map of our expected results, the application URL, the offer ID, other attributes that we're looking for, the type of offer it is, the section it was found in the top coupons. And then we have a method called verify har parameters. Once again, this should be part of the gist that I'm able to share. And you basically say har request versus har parameters. That is, har request is the actual results, har parameter is the expected results. And this method will go through and compare and log all of the key value pairs that it's looking at. And it will also throw any exceptions if there's a mismatch. The enable har, I just wanted to show this real quick. This is part of the gist that I'll be publishing. The bottom left link, the bit.ly link, if I can get to it. The bit.ly link at the bottom is the gist. And it is, I can tell you it is incomplete. There are some things missing, but it does give you the code itself. And I would be glad to work with anyone after this to try to make it more complete. But I wanted to share the code because I think it is illustrative. It can give you a very good starting point in how to start using BrowserMob to do this kind of analytics work. So that's how you test to see that the event was thrown off by your application. What I mean by that is you want to make sure that the analytics system delivered the behavior that you expected it to deliver to the downstream system. The next logical question for us was, how do we know that the downstream system processed it correctly? Unfortunately, I can't show you a demonstration because we've recently changed our platform that we use for business analytics, but we're trying at some point to retrofit it. But I will describe the process that we worked on that was functioning for a while, that allowed us to do real end-to-end testing against our user analytics. Essentially what it is we would click on an item and we would build our expected key value pairs and say, this is the behavior that we saw. And we would we're going to put that into a queue to be tested later. And then our downstream system, asynchronously, a system that has no relation, probably isn't even in the same availability zone as our main site, that downstream system needs to show us that within 15 minutes, it received and was able to process that event so that we know from the beginning of time until the point where the business intelligence community starts to care about it, that we have registered an event that went all the way through the pipeline. We've tested our pipeline all the way through. So what we would do is we would cobble a JSON object and throw it to this endpoint that would say, here's what we expect within 15 minutes. And then later on, the downstream system was made testable, thankfully, by the developers. It was made testable in that when it recognized certain objects that had been signed a certain way, it would say, hey, this is actually an end-to-end test. I need to throw this at another endpoint called the actual or the result endpoint as part of the other system. And so the system itself that was doing this comparison would take both, when it sees the expectation and a result that matches, it's within the time frame that you told it to expect that. It'll compare the key values point by point, and it will tell you this one attribute didn't make it, or this expectation didn't make it in time, or the result didn't make it in time to match the expectation. So either your system is inaccurate or it's running slowly, and you need to look at that. So we would cause alerts, PagerDuty to happen if these things were mismatches or took too long to arrive. And that's something that I think should be built into software for the whole world to use. We have not yet been able to do something that we could release, but once again, I think that it would be a beautiful opportunity for an open source project. If anyone would like to collaborate on that, I invite you to find me on GitHub. So we put together this really nice looking dashboard. This is back in the days of Kibana. I think we've moved to a different thing by now, but this dashboard was really helpful because this would show us constantly how many analytic events that we were looking for in the end-to-end testing would actually make it downstream. It would show the different kinds of offers, how quickly they made it. If it's red on the top bar chart, then it would be registered as a fail, like it took too long, or it became stale in that it got there, but by the time it got there, nobody cared anymore, or something like that. So this reporting was key to making this visible to other people, other stakeholders. They could glanceably look up at this dashboard and say, hey, the system seems to be falling behind, especially here on the right-hand side of the bar chart. Something is happening with our system. We don't know if it's because the BI system has become slow, or if there's some comparison problem, or if we're just admitting the wrong analytics to begin with. And so this is the kind of thing that a CEO would look at and be able to know within 5 seconds whether or not the analytics are firing through the system correctly. So that's most of what I have on analytics, but I wanted to point out that there are several other people in the QA world that are working on this. My good friend Anand Bagmar, who's also on the Selenium conference planning committee, he has released some open source around testing Adobe Analytics, also called Omniture. This was actually something that we used back when we used Omniture. It's a very nice piece of software that allows you to do very similar things to what I was describing with intercepting your proxy. But this uses some of the features that Adobe Analytics has built into it that allow you to test without really any extra effort on your part. You drop the jar file in, you add a couple of lines of code to your tests, and you're able to examine your analytic events really, really easily. So I invite you to follow Anand on Twitter, and I believe he'll be speaking at several conferences coming up soon. So brilliant guy. Also invite you to look up Julian Hardy and Antoine Aymer. They wrote a book called The Mobile Analytics Playbook. Very good guide, fairly quick read, and very illustrative to why we do what we do and how to get started on mobile, because mobile is frankly a more complicated beast than desktop in order to capture this kind of thing. There are not very many mature tools at this point. Once again, I invite all collaborators to help us build out this platform of analytics testing tools. And so in conclusion, what I think everyone in QA wants, most people who I speak to, you want relevance. You want to know that you're testing the right thing for your business, and you want to know that you're being recognized for what you are testing. And most people, what that amounts to is they end up testing whether or not the button is blue or green, rather than asking the question, what is telling us that the users want it to be blue or green? Which is, I think, the real provenance of the QA tester is, what should the users what should they expect? What will maximize their user experience? and how are we doing right by them? And I swear, I worked here for a year and a half before our CEO knew my name. After we had the Highball incident and subsequently built out our end-to-end analytics testing suite, he definitely knew my name. And I think it was a very good and a genuinely good way to get on the radar of engineering and prove that, you know, unlike a lot of cases, QA in this case is after the company's best interests, and we can prove it because we're dealing with your most important conversations. We're delivering real value because, like I say here, multi-million-dollar decisions are made with this data. I'm not exaggerating in the slightest. That is a statement that I think that it would behoove everyone listening to go to their engineering department or to their marketing department or to their BI department today and say, in what way can I go and start testing our analytics so that you have confidence and trust in the data that we're throwing off when our users click around on our sites? And just to put another fine point on this, analytics are software. It is exactly like software in that it contains bugs, it needs testing, it needs planning, it needs to be given the same priority and treatment as any other kind of software, whether you can see it or not. And the QA is the last line of defense to make sure that this data is trustworthy and protected. So I feel like it's pretty important to point out that with all the latest headlines, slide 34 got created because this is starting to get scary. We are the gatekeepers to safety in analytics data. We need to trust other people's data as we want any company to treat our own data. And I really would like everyone here to hold their own company accountable. If they see things that are wrong, I want whistles blown. I want things to be done. At RetailMeNot, we hold this stuff very sacred. We actually keep rather small amounts of personal information at RetailMeNot, but what we do keep, I think we hold on to it dearly, and we are very protective to make sure that we are not being creepy. So in conclusion, I'd like to thank you very much. I think we have a few minutes for questions. Seems like I got the timing somewhat right, but I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of it, and I would encourage you to follow me on Twitter. We talk about analytics. I talk about testing. I talk about diversity and inclusion in the software engineering and conference space. And I want to thank Adi for inviting me to do this webinar. And I want to invite everyone else again to collaborate with me on GitHub on how we can build some really nice, slick tools for this kind of thing. Okay.
So Marcus, first of all, thank you very much. That was incredible. I want to say to everyone that is listening that I also see your all the nice stuff you're telling, that all your notes about thanking Marcus for this wonderful presentation, and I promise that all of them will be emailed to him, so he will see all your compliments. Just so you know, he will get every single one of them. So yeah, we have quite a few questions. Let's start and let's see where we get. First one, slide 20. Which analytics tool do you recommend to use?
Sorry, let me move back to it. Analytics tools, do you mean for testing?
I don't know. They just wrote, which analytics tool do you recommend to use? If you want to recommend the ones for testing, then go ahead.
Sure. So I can talk very briefly about for creating analytics as well as testing them very, very briefly. We have a proprietary analytics tool that we created for RetailMeNot, and my bet is a lot of companies are still doing that. Now, Adobe Analytics and Google Analytics are the main players in this space right now. Adobe Analytics for enterprise and Google Analytics for, you can have a site you can stand up Google Analytics today within minutes and just have it running. Now, the main difference between those two products when you're producing analytics are that Google Analytics does sampling, which means they don't show you 100% of all traffic all the time. They determine when they will be showing you that data, and you can tweak it to some extent, but you can't really control it. whereas Omniture, Adobe Analytics shows you everything all the time, always. The downside of Omniture is that it sends a really, really huge wad of data, as opposed to Google Analytics, which is a fairly small request. So that's on the emitting end of analytics. For testing, this is where I'm afraid I point out that I don't really think there are very many tools out there. When I first got into this, I found Anand's Watt testing tool that I mentioned on the penultimate slide. And that is the only tool I've ever seen from a third party that allows you to just drop in and start testing analytics. I had to code everything we do from scratch, which is why, once again, I want to encourage everyone to help me build out something more interesting.
Great. Can you hear me, by the way?
Yes, I can.
I hope okay, good. I thought I was on mute. A question about slide 27.
Okay.
Explain what you mean by test groups golden. What determines your golden category?
Oh man, seems like we should do a whole webinar on the Java framework we use here at work. That is a test-in-G annotation indicating that this is part of the golden tests. That we have a process in production where we say run only the tests within the golden group, which is the same thing as saying a smoke test, I think you'd say. Like there are probably 20 tests tagged with golden, which means this test has to pass in order for us to say we are going to go live in production. And that's an enumerated type. It's not a string, so that's the reason it looks like that. It doesn't look like a string. It's enumerated type. I can, once again, Adi, we could do a whole webinar on this framework. It's pretty cool.
Well, you know that you're always invited, right?
All right.
Okay, so next question doesn't have a slide number, but I think it's interesting. What test scenarios would you design when testing analytics?
I would first and foremost find out what is, I would go one of two ways, one of which is there a single most popular thing that happens on your website if you're a B2C player? In our case, if you go search Macy's and you click on a coupon, that's the thing that, or not Macy's necessarily, but if you search for a particular store and click on a coupon, that's the most popular thing that happens on our website. So what I would do is I would start looking for, let's make sure the search is working. Let's make sure the search is sending the right analytics, because the search, whenever you do autocomplete, every single time you enter a character, it's sending a different analytic event to try to figure out what people are doing and make the predictive text work. And then I would do the most popular thing that you've got. The other route I could take is, what is a big change that you think is coming soon, and do you think you'd get some value out of coding an automated test around the change in analytics that will come along with that test? Because that might be hero time if you can find a bug in the software that was changing the analytics at its most vulnerable state when it's about to be altered. That would be my recommendation, is take a big feature you know is about to change. I don't know if that was specific enough.
I hope so. Next question is about slide 25 regarding proxy and data gathering. And the question is it possible you'd miss analytics mapping if you stop the proxy too fast after an interaction with an element? How do you get around slow loading DOMs?
If you see the code snippet, actually, I didn't even need the escape out of there. It's in here. The code snippet here, we actually have a method that I think is in that gist called wait for har entry to exist. So there's actually, when you click the code, you tell your proxy, I don't want you to stop recording until you see this event that threw off this key pair. When you see that, then it's safe to verify the status code and stop recording. So that's what we do. We wait until it happens. And I think we have a timeout of like 60 seconds built into there. So if it doesn't happen within 60 seconds, you'll lose it. But if it doesn't happen within 60 seconds, there was a problem that you need to investigate. So that's probably okay.
Awesome. I think that the next one will be our last question because we are running out of time. So there it is. How can you tell if the analytics implementation on your end is testable?
Is testable. The big risk to testability is if the analytics events themselves are encoded. So say they take we saw an example earlier where we're using the string offer title, and offer title could be encoded to some UID that has no actual connection to the word offer title. And so that's the biggest risk to your product not being testable, because if your analytics are working the way they do most of the time, it is simply another HTTP request that's going, and you will be able to see it when your browser emits it. So you should not have any problem there. The problem is the data itself. If it's encoded, encrypted, or somehow obscured, what I would recommend in that case is work with your developers to make available maybe in lower environments, your test or staging environment, make a decoded version of that available. Otherwise, you might only be able to test whether or not the analytic event was thrown. You might not be able to test its actual accuracy. But you can still provide some value by saying, hey, we had a particular event where a certain kind of coupon in a certain situation, it was, I think, on the holiday, Black Friday, carousel code type, simply we're not throwing off any analytics at all. And so just being able to verify that your analytic events are being thrown is a value add. But work with your developers, make it testable. That's my advice to everyone always. But yeah.
Okay, so unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for today. I want to thank everyone that joined us for this live session. And of course, I want to thank Marcus. It was amazing. And the compliments you're getting here are evidence of that. So thank you very much for taking the time and doing this with us. I really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you inviting me.
So I'm just reminding everyone that's still on the line that a link to the recording of the session will be emailed to you tomorrow. And I do hope to see you all at our next event. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Appley Tools.
Thank you, Marcus.